You were taught that the sky is empty, endless black space, a few billion miles of nothing between you and the stars. But the first civilization that ever learned to write did not see the sky that way at all. The Sumerians, who pressed the oldest records on Earth into wet clay more than 5,000 years ago, described something the modern world quietly refuses to repeat. They said the sky is not empty. They said it is a solid dome. They said it has levels and gates and guards. And they said that something was sealed on the far side of it, just above your head, held back by the gods themselves. Tonight I am going to show you the tablet they could not hide, and I am going to name what the Anunnaki sealed above the dome. Start with who these people actually were, because it changes how you hear everything that follows. The Sumerians were not a myth, and they were not primitive. They built the first cities. They opened the first schools. They invented the first written language on the planet. Every empire that came after them, every scripture, every map of the heavens, drank from the river they dug first. So when the Sumerians tell you what the sky is, you are not listening to a campfire story made up by people who did not know better. You are reading the oldest surviving description of the universe that the human race ever committed to writing, and it does not match the picture you were handed in school. These were not fools. They invented mathematics, astronomy, and the first calendar, and every time they wrote down what the sky is, they described a dome. Either the most patient observers of the ancient world were all uniquely wrong about the one thing they spent their lives staring at, or they saw something we were slowly trained to stop seeing, because to them, the heavens were not air, and they were not empty, they were stone. The Mesopotamian tablets that lay out the structure of the cosmos, the texts that scholars now call the cosmic geography, describe it with a precision that is genuinely unsettling when you read it for the first time. They do not describe one sky. They describe layers of sky, stacked domes of solid heaven, one above the other, each one made from a different kind of precious stone. The lowest heaven, the one you look up at every single day, was said to be a floor of jasper, and on the underside of that floor the stars were fixed in place, and the paths of the wandering planets were drawn like lines on a map. Above that floor was a second heaven, made of a stone they called sagalmud, and above even that, the highest heaven of all, the dwelling place of the supreme God, made of a glowing red stone, a place no human eye was ever meant to reach. And to be clear, this is not invented for a video. It is what the actual tablets say. 3 solid heavens, stacked one on top of the other, and we live pinned to the floor of the lowest one of the 3. And that lowest heaven was not described as a smooth, lifeless lid. The tablets describe it as a structure, with working parts. They speak of the bolt of heaven, and the bar that holds it shut. They describe great gates set into the dome down at the horizon, a gate in the east and a gate in the west, and they tell you that the sun does not drift across open space the way you were taught in school. It enters through the eastern gate at dawn, travels along the underside of the dome, and goes out through the western gate at dusk. And those gates are opened and shut by divine gatekeepers whose only job is to work them. The moon moves through its own doors. The stars rise and set through theirs. These people were not reaching for a vague, poetic ceiling. They were describing a mechanism, a sealed structure with doors and bolts and keepers, built and maintained the way you would describe the inside of a machine. And a door by its very nature is a thing that can be opened, sometimes from the other side, and almost no one was ever meant to cross it, but the tablets do remember a handful who tried. There is the story of Etana, one of the earliest kings, who was carried up toward the heavens on the back of a great eagle, rising higher and higher until the whole earth shrank beneath him to a small thing, and the wide sea became a pool he could have covered with his hand, climbing until the height itself grew too vast and too terrible to bear. There is Adapa, a sage who was summoned up before the highest gods and offered the bread and the water of eternal life, and who, through a misunderstanding, refused it and was sent back down to die like the rest of us. These are not careless tales about men strolling into the sky. They are stories about the rare and dangerous act of approaching the dome from the inside, of reaching the boundary and being allowed, just for a moment, to glimpse what is kept above it. The ancients did not treat that boundary as an idea. They told stories about the very few who got close enough to touch it, so who lived up there, on the far side of that stone floor, behind the gates and above the highest heaven, the Anunnaki. The name itself means something close to the offspring of An, and An was the god of the highest heaven, the sky itself given a will and a face. The Anunnaki were the great gods, the ruling assembly, the powers that decided the fate of the world. And their home was never the earth. Their home was above the dome. We were below it. They were above it. And the structure of solid heavens stacked between us was not scenery, and it was not poetry. It was a boundary, a wall, with humanity sealed on one side of it and the gods on the other, which forces the question the tablets are quietly daring you to ask. A wall is built to keep something out. So what is on the other side of yours? What needed a barrier of stone, watched and bolted and guarded, to hold it back from the world below? And their name carries a clue that researchers have argued over for a century. Some read the oldest forms of it more literally, those who from heaven came down to the earth. That reading is disputed, so I mark it as interpretation, not settled fact. But what is not in dispute is this: the Sumerians did not picture their gods as a single formless presence everywhere at once. They described a council, a specific assembly of powerful beings with a strict hierarchy, with an enthroned at the top, Enlil, who ruled the air just beneath him, and Enki, the cunning one, who governed the deep waters. 7 of them sat together as the great judges who decreed the destiny of the world. They had homes, they had thrones, they had territory, and their territory was the far side of the dome. They were not the sky itself. They lived above it, behind the stone, in the place the highest heaven was built to house. We were the tenants of the floor. They were the landlords of the roof. And the oldest creation story ever written tells you, by name, what that roof was holding back. The text is called the Enuma Elish, and it is far older than the Bible, carved and copied across Mesopotamia for thousands of years. It says that in the very beginning, there were no gods, and there was no world. There was only water, 2 great oceans of it, mingled together, the fresh water beneath, which they called Apsu, and the vast, bitter salt water, the primordial chaos of the deep, given the shape of an enormous dragon, and her name, the name you will carry out of this video, was Tiamat. Everything that would ever exist came out of her, but as the younger gods were born, Tiamat turned against them, and she raised an army of monsters to swallow them back into the chaos they came from. And so the storm god Marduk rose up to face her, and when he finally defeated the great dragon of the deep, he did something that should make the hair stand up on your arms once you hold it next to everything I have just told you. He did not let her body fall and rot. He split her in half, and out of one half of the corpse of the primordial ocean, Marduk built the sky. The text says, he stretched her over our heads like a covering. He fixed it in place as a solid barrier. He set a great bar across it, a bolt, and then, and this is the line that matters most, he stationed a guard, and he commanded that watchman to never let her waters escape. And the details of how he did it are not vague or symbolic. He caught her in a vast net, drove the howling winds into her so she could not close her mouth, and loosed a single arrow that split her open from within. Then he divided her, the tablet says, the way you would split a shellfish into 2 halves. He measured it. He set it against the deep below so that the 2 would hold each other in balance. He stretched her skin as the boundary and bolted it shut, and then he began to furnish the inside of it. He assigned stations in the dome for the great gods, and fixed the stars as their images. He marked out the months and the year. He gave the moon its nights and set its phases turning. Everything you look up and call the night sky, the constellations, the band of the moon, the slow turning of the seasons, is described in the oldest epic on earth as the engineered interior of a dead god, built and calibrated by hand, on purpose. Nothing in that account is natural. All of it was made and sealed and set in motion deliberately. In the oldest story humanity ever wrote down, the sky over your head is a barrier built from the body of a defeated ocean of chaos. It exists for one reason, to hold the water back, and it is guarded on purpose so that the water can never come through. That is what the Anunnaki sealed above the dome. Not a treasure, not a god in hiding, an ocean, the primordial deep, the chaos that came before creation, pressed against the outside of the sky like the sea against the hull of a ship, and the only thing standing between it and you is a stone roof that the gods built and then posted a guard to watch. The dome was never made to be seen through. It was made to keep something out. And there is a second meaning hiding inside the word seal, and it is the one that changes how the whole thing feels once you notice it. A seal works in 2 directions at once. A wall built to keep the ocean out is also, at the very same time, a wall that keeps you in. The guard Marduk posted was told to watch the waters, but a guard watches a prison just as closely as he watches a gate. So which is it? Is the dome a shield? raised to protect the small ordered world of mankind from the chaos that would drown it the instant it got through? Or is it the lid on a container with all of us sealed inside it, beneath a sky we are not permitted to pass, watched over by keepers who answer to powers that live on the outside? The tablets describe the structure of the wall with total confidence. They are strangely, completely silent about which side of it the prisoner is on. Tell me in the comments which one you think it is, a shield or a lid. And here is where it stops being an ancient curiosity and starts to feel like a warning, because the same people who described the seal also wrote down, in detail, what happens when it fails. Long before the story of Noah was ever told, the Sumerians and the Babylonians wrote of a great flood. In their version, in the account of a man called Atrahasis, who appears again later as Utnapishtim, the gods grow tired of mankind, and they decide to wipe the earth clean with water. And the question is, how the water comes. It does not rise up out of the rivers. It comes from above. The text says the floodgates of heaven were opened. The barrier that Marduk built and bolted and guarded is released, and the ocean that had been sealed above the dome since the first day of creation comes pouring back down onto the world it was separated from. The flood, in the oldest account we possess, is not a storm. It is the sky itself being unsealed. It is the guard standing aside and letting the deep come home. And it was only survived because one of the gods, the clever one, Enki, broke ranks against the others and warned a single man to build a vessel before the waters fell. And the most haunting image in that entire flood account is not the water at all. It is the gods themselves. Because when the seal broke and the deep came down, the storm that followed was so total, so far beyond what they had imagined, that even the gods who had ordered it were terrified by what they had let loose. The oldest version says they fled upward, away from it, and crouched against the wall of the highest heaven, cowering like frightened dogs, and they wept at what was happening to the world far below them. The beings who built the barrier, who held the keys to it, who voted to open it, were horrified the moment it actually opened. That is how the people who invented writing chose to remember the day the dome failed, not as bad weather, as the return of the thing that had always been waiting on the other side, a thing so total and so terrible that even the ones who released it could not bear to watch it do its work. And when the waters finally fell still and the silence returned, the one man who lived through it looked out and said that all of mankind had been turned back into clay. And if all of this is beginning to sound strangely familiar, it should, because the people who wrote your own Bible came out of that exact same world, and they inherited that exact same sky. Open the very first chapter of Genesis, and it is sitting there in plain words that almost no one stops to read. On the second day of creation, God makes a firmament, a solid dome, and the single job that dome is given is to separate the waters above it from the waters below it, the waters above. Genesis simply takes for granted as an obvious and unremarkable fact that there is an ocean resting on top of the sky, exactly as the Sumerians had said 1,000 years before. And when the great flood finally arrives in Genesis, the text does not only tell you that it rained, it tells you that the windows of heaven were opened, the same image, the same waters held above, the same barrier breaking and letting them fall. And it was not only Mesopotamia and Israel. Travel to Egypt, a completely separate civilization with its own gods, its own language, and its own river, and you find the very same architecture built into the sky. The Egyptians pictured the goddess Nut as the heavens themselves, her star-covered body arched over the earth from one horizon to the other, and beyond her, surrounding everything that existed, the dark primordial waters they called Nun, the same endless deep that came before creation, held back so that the ordered world could go on existing inside it. Different names, different gods, the identical blueprint, an ordered world, sealed inside a barrier, with an infinite ocean of chaos pressing in from the outside. When three separate ancient civilizations, who raised their monuments on three different rivers and never agreed on much of anything else, all independently insist that the sky is a lid holding back a cosmic sea, you are no longer looking at one culture's local superstition. You are looking at something the entire ancient world treated as plain and common knowledge. That is what they could not hide. It is not buried in a single forgotten tablet. It is written into the opening pages of the most read book on earth, carved onto the ceilings of Egyptian tombs, and pressed into Sumerian clay, and we simply, slowly, stopped believing our own oldest eyes. So go back to the beginning, to that empty black sky you were handed as a child. The oldest minds that ever recorded a single thought looked up at the same sky you see, and they saw the exact opposite of emptiness. They saw a ceiling. They saw a floor of jasper with the stars driven into it like nails. They saw levels of stone stacked above that floor, and gates with keepers, and at the very top, behind the red stone, the throne room of the gods. And pressed against the outside of all of it, the primordial ocean of Tiamat, the chaos that existed before anything else. held back by a wall the gods had built out of her own murdered body, and watched, without rest, by a guard who was commanded to never ever let her through. That is what the Anunnaki sealed above the dome. Not a secret kingdom, not a buried city of gold, the flood itself. The undoing of the entire world, kept in a reservoir the oldest record on Earth says is resting over your head, behind a wall, under guard, since the first morning of creation. And the only thing the tablets will promise you about that wall is that it has failed before. And there is one more thing they wrote, the part I am going to hold back, because it is the part that should follow you out of this video and into the night. The tablets do not only describe the seal, they describe the openings in it. They describe the gates and the keepers who work them, and they say there are beings whose entire purpose is to move through them, down to us and back up again. So who really holds the keys to the gates in your sky? What is permitted to come down through them and what is being held out? And what exactly the Anunnaki have been doing all this time on the other side of the wall? That is the next tablet, and I am not ready to translate it for you yet. For now, if you followed me all the way up to the top of the sky and back down again, then you are standing in a different world than the one you woke up in this morning. So leave me one word. Write Tiamat in the comments, her name, so I know you understand what is resting over your head right now. Because the oldest record on the face of the earth says that you have spent your whole life standing at the bottom of a sealed world, staring up at a floor of stone, and calling it the heavens. And the only question the tablet leaves open is the one you will think about tonight when you look up. What happens to all of us on the day the seal is finally opened?